Welcome into Jake and Joshua, where we sound off on some of the biggest topics in Big Ten football. A little bit more somber over here on this side. I'm Joshua Perry. That's Jake Butt, who has a huge smile on his face right now. And it is because of the result of the game that happened in Columbus over the weekend. Michigan won that thing running away. I obviously have a lot of thoughts, but I'd like to give you the floor first to express your thoughts on the game and overall how you feel.
Well, I feel great as an alum of the school, as a guy that played for Coach Harbaugh. It was so much of, we set the table in the pregame show of what needed to happen for either team to win. We talked about big moments, and the explosive plays to me that Michigan was able to capitalize on were big moments. Cade Stover back in the end zone. C.J. Stroud has a chance to hit him. That's a play a big tight end should make. But Mike Sainristil makes an unbelievable play.
Kept playing.
Moment, bats it away. Michigan elevated in moments. We also talked about players. Hey, your best players have to play their best game for 60 minutes. I thought not only just their best players, I thought across the board Michigan played one of their best football games. A guy like Will Johnson. We're not looking at video game stats from Marvin Harrison Jr. this week. Big part of that is Will Johnson in the Michigan secondary. So guys stepped up, and then, what Michigan did, what stood out to me, and there's telling stats from last year to this year, second half,
right,
which comes down to coaching and adjustments, right? As a player, you just get the play call, then you go out there and you execute. You just do your job. So it's on the coaches to put you in a winning position. It's on the coaches to adjust to the flow of the game and what the other team's presenting. Michigan's been dominant now in the second half in both games.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I think the biggest thing that Michigan did throughout that game was mentally they stayed the course. Like they had to overcome some battles in that one. And we were sitting there in the first half, and there were moments where J.J. McCarthy looked rattled. He looked like a young quarterback playing for the first time in the horseshoe, but his mentality continued to build throughout the game, and I think that's really important. From my standpoint, there is the emotional reaction, which you go through immediately after the game. It's disappointing, and I think this year more so disappointing than a year ago because you can look at specific moments, as we talked about, where Ohio State, if they make the play, this game could look totally different. Whereas last year, you felt like from top to bottom, they basically got dominated throughout that game. Michigan felt like they were in full control of it. And so that's different to reconcile with. But when you start to look at the game from a rational standpoint, I think things start to settle in a little bit more. You go back and forth. Like Ohio State, you take 55 plays that they played on defense where they played suffocating defense, right? Michigan was in those plays under 3 yards a carry. Michigan in those plays was completing 42% of their passes. But then you get to the plays that actually matter, the big explosive plays that decide the football game. And Ohio State unequivocally lost those plays. That's the difference in the game. That, to me, points more to mentality than anything else that goes on the football field. Then you look at 9 penalties that occurred in that game for almost 100 yards. That is a difference in a game. So all these things start to stack up. And then you mention adjustments, and I think Ohio State was a little bit stubborn defensively in play calling. You can say that you look at the plays that worked and said, well, it did its job. I totally agree with that. You can also say that your cornerbacks probably need a little bit more relief and coverage than what they got. But here's the other thing, is there were plays where they made adjustments that they didn't make. One of those long touchdowns came when they were playing a too high safety defense, and they got routed on a double move. Yeah. The safety in the boundary doesn't sink at all. And then here you're looking at a guy who maybe, even as a backstop, if he doesn't make a play on the ball, can make a tackle and save a touchdown. That doesn't happen. And so for Ohio State now, you leave that game saying that from a physical standpoint, you don't feel like you really got beat up. From a game flow standpoint, you feel like there were multiple times where you were in control of that game. But from a big play standpoint, from the plays that make players legends in that game, you did not achieve what you needed to do. And that is probably the most disappointing part of this.
I want to bring something up here too, because you have to demonstrate a total understanding of defensive schemes. You have to know your job, then you have to know why that's your job, and then you have to know what the other people's jobs are around you so you can solve problems as they come.
100%.
The first pass on 3rd and 9 out to Cornelius Johnson, he breaks a tackle down the sideline for a touchdown. Okay, so you're going to bring 0 blitz. Great, fine. The corner is on an off coverage. Great, fine. You complete the pass out there. The corner has to know, and this has to be taught and communicated. Hey, Play basketball.
Right.
Don't come up to hit the tackle. Because if you whiff like he did, he's gone down the side.
Body position him, give some time for your pursuit to get there, get him out of bounds, whatever the case is.
That's a totality of understanding of the defensive scheme and what is trying to be accomplished on that play. They didn't get it done. Michigan did. You mentioned the double move on the corner post. Cornelius Johnson comes in motion. They're in a too-high defense. As a safety, you can't bite. You cannot be quick to bite to the corner, because you have underneath help out there. It's a much more difficult throw out to the edge of the sideline.
Right.
If you bite, though, you have no help in the middle of the field. Offenses attack in between the hashes versus cover 2. He bit. Cornelius Johnson wins. Another big touchdown. So that's where these little details, they say football's a game of inches. You know, these little small things within the game can make all the difference in the world. Sometimes it doesn't prove to be costly. But in your biggest game, as we just said, you have to play your best game, and Ohio State didn't in those moments.
Yeah, and just to kind of put the cherry on top of that too, is when you have big plays that go against you defensively, it's an issue. But one of the things that we used to say in the locker room is just get the guy down on the ground so we can play another snap. And we had talked about some of the trouble that Michigan had putting together complete drives, and I think they only really had one in that football game. They had struggled in the red zone throughout the year. And one of the things that I said on one of the shows, and everybody laughed at me because it's like, that's a stupid thing to say. It's really not, and you'll understand why when I say it. If you have trouble scoring in the red zone, you know what the best solution is? Don't get in the red zone. Do not get in the red zone and have to drop plays to try to score. Score from the field. And so what did Michigan do? They had plays designed where they could score from the field. That's the difference in the game, because that is a way for them to overcome one of their weaknesses and take advantage of something that Ohio State felt like they would be able to do to Michigan. So as I look at this game, I think you summed it up extremely well. There were huge moments where Michigan players made the plays that they needed to make, Ohio State didn't. There were adjustments that were made by Michigan staff that were phenomenal. And then when you look across the board, I think it was a steady performance. And that's what makes a difference here. But I will say this, and this is a point of caution from somebody who's been in locker rooms where you're chasing championship status, is the emotional games are the ones that lie to you the most. The big wins and the emotional situations. What I mean by this, and this is not to diminish anything that happened on Saturday, but a quarterback completing 50% of his passes, most defensive coordinators would look at that and say, that's a win for the defense. When your offense rushes for most of the day for under 3 a carry, and you can't remove the big plays. Those plays absolutely matter. But you have to figure out what happened the rest of the game so you can get more of those long rushing plays. Michigan had more plays that went for 0 or negative yards than they did that went for 10 or more yards. They doubled up the negative plays and 0-yard gains. That's something that they're going to look at and say, this is where we can get better. You look at Michigan defensively, they had 1 sack on C.J. Stroud. And this is a team that had done a really good job as a group up front of getting sacks. They had a bunch of players that were getting after the quarterback. That's something that they can look critically at. So my message to Michigan now is, I believe this is a team that can win a national championship. They have all the pieces. They have the mentality to do it. Don't let the emotional win lie to you. Don't go on Twitter and see all the people telling you how great you are. Because JJ said before this game, there was meat on the bone and they were going to take it off. There's still a lot of meat left that they can even remove right now. And that's where you get into that championship status.
Yeah, and you're also your most vulnerable after a big win. It's like a lion in the wild. You're most vulnerable after a big meal, right? You're going to lay down and take a nap. No time to take a nap, though, because you're right. This goes all the way back to last year. I mean, Blake Corum said after they lost to Georgia in the college football semifinals, we will be back, and we will be back because we've been here before, and this team wants to make it back. Well, Purdue is Purdue, and they're one of the most, out of all teams in the West, they might be the most dangerous team because of the way they play football.
We said before we even knew who was going to win the game and who was going to come out of the West that Purdue would be the worst matchup for Ohio State or Michigan because of what they've been all year. You don't know what you're going to get, and at their top end, they're a very dangerous team. So,
and it's Jeff Brom where his identity is we're going to be hyper aggressive. I called one of their games earlier, and Payne Durham told us, he said, hey, yeah, we carry 30 trick plays on any given week. And all it takes is the first quarter is so important because if Purdue's hitting on some of those trick plays, you feel helpless as a team. If they aren't and they go 3 and out, you're like, okay, we're in full control.
Bro, who has 30 trick plays?
I couldn't, yeah.
Like, seriously.
So I asked him, I'm like, is that like a reverse? Is that a trick play? Is it like a throwback screen? He's like, no. Those are part of our base packages. We have legitimately 30, a full playbook of trick plays. So.
Jeff Brom is a mad scientist, and I just imagine him sitting in an office on a grease board, and they put the grids up there so they can have their different play concepts, and every grid is full. And then he's got like the college professor where you move the grease board up and there's one underneath it, and there's more grids. Like,
he said they got a full period that they dedicate every single week to trick plays, but it's this whole thing on trick plays perfectly into what you're saying, which comes down to discipline and maturity.
Absolutely.
And it's a great win. You should celebrate a win. You should celebrate an undefeated regular season. You should celebrate going on the road and beating your rival. But you have to turn the page at some point because the season's not over, right?
Yeah.
That was a stepping stone towards your ultimate goal. We just talked about what makes Purdue dangerous. To beat them, you have to be disciplined.
Yep.
You have to be accountable to your job. And then if you want to go win a national championship, you're going to have to play even better than you did against Ohio State. You're going to have to improve and prove you can steadily move the ball down the field because other teams are going to see that film and say, we're not going to give up the explosive plays. Right. We'll see if you can beat us.
Yeah, and the good thing for Michigan is they were in this position a year ago coming off of a very emotional win against Ohio State, and they performed probably better than what we expected against an Iowa defense that was stout, and they stifled their offense the whole game. So this is a team that has shown us that they can be mature. I don't necessarily worry about that, but it is one of the things that has been almost a trap for some of these teams that have high aspirations is you let the emotions overcome the rationale and the logic as you get into game plan and you get into adjustments. I'd like to go through some of the Big Ten award winners. I think it kind of went through what we expected, but there are a couple of spots where I think there's some snubs. So, you get into the Offensive Player of the Year, C.J. Stroud, he's been phenomenal. You get into the Defensive Player of the Year, Jack Campbell has done a great job. Freshman of the Year, Nicholas Singleton, and we've watched him go out there and have some great performances. Jim Harbaugh getting Coach of the Year, and he absolutely deserves it. Then you look at Quarterback of the Year, CJ. Marvin Harrison Jr. wins Wide Receiver of the Year. Blake Corums, Running Back of the Year. Sam Laporta got the Tight End Award. Peter Skoronski from Northwestern gets the Lineman of the Year. Defensive Lineman of the Year is Mike Morris, and he's been sensational this year. Again, Jack Campbell, Linebacker of the Year. And then you've got Devin Witherspoon, put his face on somebody and bite through it at defensive back, winning that award. Jake Moody is the Kicker of the Year, and Bryce Behringer from Michigan State is the Punter of the Year. Return specialist Jalen Lucas from Indiana, who was electric in a lot of situations. Out of those names and the awards that were given, do you think there are any snubs that you'd like to talk about?
I wouldn't say there's any glaring snubs. Like everyone, you can only have one award winner, and there's cases to be made. I think you and I will agree on this. The tight end, we love the Payne train out there in Purdue.
I do.
He's a stud. He's a great tight end. I'm perfectly fine with Sam Laporta getting the award just because, hey, when Iowa needed an offense, there was really one guy they were going to. It was 84 Laporta. And you look at like 50-plus catches this year. 1/3 of them were at the solo receiver, 1/3 of them were in the slot, and 1/3 of them were at tight end. So he literally did everything for the offense that year, and he did it in big moments. So I'm okay with that. And then I think you had the chance, the offensive line of the year, right? Skoronski's a great guy, but
yes, Oluwatimi from Michigan. The way that he played, he is the impact transfer across college football. But the way that he played on an offensive line, where I think coming into the year there were questions about whether they could be as good as they were a year ago when they won the Joe Moore Award for the best offensive line. You can make a case that they're better this year and should win that award again. I think he's a huge reason why, and you need to have a strong apex in there in the interior of your offensive line. He's certainly that guy to me. So if there's a snub there, and again, nothing against Peter Skoronski and what he's done, and he's going to be a phenomenal player at the next level. But I think Olu's impact on his team and the production that he's created from the offensive line position in that rushing attack that's been Michigan's bread and butter all year, I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. I'll circle back on the tight ends and say this. I'm with you on Laporta and his value and what he meant to that team and the plays that he made. Because if I'm a defensive coordinator, I'm leading coverage to him all game. Like there's one guy who can hurt me on Iowa's offense, and it was Sam Laporta. But the Payne train, some of the physical touchdowns that he had, some of the catches that he had to make to convert to points really stands out to me. Like you go back a couple weeks, he's got to go up top, basically grab a rebound and then try to get a foot down inbounds to get a touchdown. That was a ridiculous play. seemed like 2 weeks in a row, he catches a ball near the goal line and then just has to bulldoze through a guy or two to get it into the end zone. He's 5th in the Big Ten in touchdown receptions from the tight end position. I love the way that he plays the game of football, and I would have had no problem if his name would have been on that award this year.
I'll play devil's advocate. Everything you said is absolutely true. Where Payne benefits that Sam Laporta doesn't have the benefit is he's got a guy, Charlie Jones, outside of him. That's their teams are going to have to roll coverage too. Aiden O'Connell has played consistently better football than Spencer Petras, excuse me. So that's where I'm at. You can't go wrong. I want to just say one more thing about offensive linemen because they get this identity that they're big brutes and they're not very smart. Chemistry matters on the offensive line.
I agree.
And for Olu to come in as a center, all communication starts from the inside out,
Apex.
right? And he hadn't played with those guys. He hasn't even played with them for a full year. So to be able to make sure you're all on the same page, double teams are in the right place, protection, identifying who's going to go where if they bring the pressure. What he's done mentally and from a leadership standpoint, guys said, hey, if he hadn't just got here, he would have been a captain. He would have been a consistent, probably a multi-year captain. He has that level of respect for him. So we'll give a shout out to him. Peter Skronsky, certainly deserving as well. He'll be a first-round pick.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is award season's usually interesting because you get some of the snubs, and I think that speaks more to the phenomenal players that are here in this conference than anything else. Like, I look at some of these awards, and there are multiple guys who would have been deserving, and I think they deserve their credit, and it's hats off to the way that the coaches have developed some of these players, but also the way some of these guys have gone out and played the game of football. Like, I, as a guy who played in this conference, and you were the same way, I'm always impressed by the young men that come through here on the football fields, the way that they behave and they carry themselves and they play the game of football. It's awesome to watch.
No doubt.
All right, that's it. I'll do it for Jake and Joshua, and we'll catch you next time.